I am going to begin with a bit of a confession. Up until the exact moment that I was told I'd have the opportunity to talk to you all here today, I had thought that the first TED Talk was given by TED. I am many things, perceptive is not always one of them. Fortunately for all of you, someone gently informed me that TED actually stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Those are the three fields that the founders of TED believed would shape our world, and those are the three things that I would like to talk to you about today. Not any one of them in particular, but where technology, entertainment, and design all intersect. I am a narrative designer, which is a profession that most people usually have not heard of. So when I am asked what that is, and when I am really not in the mood to talk about work right now, usually I will just say that it means I write the stories for video games. Because that is true, but it is definitely the simple answer. The truer version is more abstract. The reality is that narrative design is very difficult to define, and so most narrative designers have their own slightly unique interpretation of what it is that they do. But I think about my work this way. I don't just write stories, I design new types of stories. And to give you a sense of what I even mean when I say that, I am going to talk about some work I've done recently. So this last year, I helped write and design a game called Starship Commander. It is a virtual reality game that is driven entirely by human speech, which means there is no controller. Instead, you talk out loud to whichever character you'd like to speak to. The microphone on your headset picks that up, we run it through our computer, and whichever character you spoke to responds. It is a game that you play by having a conversation with the script. So my role on this game was to design a type of story and a type of script that, to the best of our knowledge, had never been built before. On some level, yes, my job was to write it, but it was also to figure out how it would even be possible to write something like this. So I worked together with members of my team to figure out, as an example, how to contain the sheer volume of different responses we might need to write. Because at any point in this game, in theory, the player could say whatever they want. They could say millions and millions of things, and obviously we can't write and program and record responses to all of them. We had to funnel that potential into a system we could actually build. We had to figure out how we were going to write all of the dialogue in a way that made grammatical sense, even though we really didn't know exactly how the player phrased their comment that led to the line being played. And my personal favorite, we had to figure out what we were going to do if a player said something that broke the story. What happens when someone who's already played the game before comes back and decides to warn all your characters, hey everybody, Jeremy's going to betray us in like 5 minutes. What do you do in that situation? My job was to design a kind of story that had answers to all of those questions, but that was also plausible for our programmers to actually build. That's what I mean when I say I design new types of stories. In a large way, I'm a writer in exactly the same way every other writer is a writer, but a large part of my work and a large part of my passion is figuring out what kinds of stories we're going to have in 10, 15 years. What are those experiences going to be like? And how can we start to invent the storytelling strategies that we're going to need to tell them effectively? So, in the last 130 years, we have developed a colossal array of different storytelling technologies. But most of it has really only done a couple of things for us. On one hand, it has changed which senses we're able to use when we participate in a story. We can listen to radio, we can watch a film. If you've been to an amusement park in the last 20 years, you might have smelled a film. There's some of those out there. And on the other hand, it also completely shattered the scope of what we thought it was possible for an audience to be. Film and television in particular have reached a massive swath of the world's population in a way that older storytelling mediums like theater could never dream of. But what that technology hadn't really done is it hadn't changed our fundamental understanding of what a story is, and therefore what a story could be. Throughout pretty much all of human history, a story has been a linear sequence of events. A book is a linear sequence of words, a film is a linear sequence of images and sounds, and so regardless of whether you are reading the book or watching the Muppet version, Ebenezer Scrooge visits the ghost of Christmas past, then present, then future in that order every time. The technology we developed changed our experience with stories, but it didn't change the fact that really we only knew how to tell stories by saying first A happened, then B happened, then C happened. That didn't change until recently. Once technology advanced to the point where we could start making the first video games, we realized that as storytellers, we have a huge problem because we only know how to make a story as a sequence, but ultimately a game isn't a sequence. A video game is an environment. And inside that environment, players can do whatever they like, which at times can really disrupt the sequence of things that you, as the writer, really wish would have happened. So we figured out pretty quickly that if we're going to tell good stories through video games, we need to get inventive. We need to reinvent our understanding of what a story is and how to tell it. So we started to experiment, and we discovered something really interesting. We learned that while on some level a story is always about an event or a sequence of events, what matters more than the event itself is the idea of that event. It's the idea that something happened, and this is why it happened, and this is why it matters. We realized if we can communicate the idea of an event to the player, we don't necessarily need to create the event itself in real time in front of them. And once we had that epiphany, once we started thinking about stories as ideas, we realized that there is many ways of telling a story as there are ways of communicating an idea. And this Pandora's box of different types of stories that we hadn't really thought of and that no one knew how to build opened up in front of us. We started experimenting with concepts like environmental storytelling, which is the idea that a place can be a story. A really interesting and much beloved example of that is the Dark Souls games. Those are games that really pared back on the idea of plot and having an interesting sequence of things happen to you as you played it, and they really pared back on dialogue. Instead, they focused on the world. And if you were paying attention, if you were studying the environment and the art and the architecture and what items are here and who used to own those items and why do we think they were left where I found them and how this place is connected to all of the other places I've been to, if you started searching for those individual ideas, they puzzled themselves together into the bigger idea, the story idea of what was this place and what happened and why did it happen and why did it matter. The story in Dark Souls is not the sequence of things that happen. The story is the place. We started experimenting with other ideas, like procedural storytelling, which is the idea that a mathematical system, and specifically the behavior of that system, can be a story. An interesting example is a game called The Shrouded Isle, which tells the story of a sacrificial cult. But it does not tell its story by funneling you through a sequence of pre-written scenes. Instead, it tells its story by allowing you to engage with the behavior of a cult, and specifically to show you how that behavior reacts to your behavior, how your choices get twisted around back on you, and how this kind of behavior in and of itself is so venomous and so poisonous that communities built off of it can't help but implode. That idea of what's happening and why it's happening and why it matters gets clearer and clearer to you the more you interact with the systems inside the game. We started experimenting with all of these wildly different types of stories. And while we have made admirable progress with some of them, the reality is that we've barely scratched the surface. It's the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of stories we're about to learn how to tell. Now, when I am at a businessy, networky type event, and when I A, would like to have something really smart to say right now, but B, can't actually think of anything, I will often recycle a joke about how we are closer to Ready Player One than you might think, hopefully without the dystopia. Fingers crossed, everybody recycle. But I will often use this as an example in much the same way that sometimes I'll explain my job as I write the stories for video games. It is the truth in the sense that it is part of a greater truth, but it's the part of the truth that's simple. It's the part we can all immediately wrap our heads around. Because ultimately something like Oasis, the fictional game in this universe, we already know how to build that. We know how it works. All of those systems and features already exist in other games. We understand them. We understand how they would connect together. The reality is that it hasn't happened, not even because the technology is incapable of it, but just because it's too expensive. The amount of money it would cost to create a super game like this would cost so much, and it would cost so much for people to buy, that nobody would make any money off of it. But it is an inevitability. As technology advances and gets cheaper, it is a matter of time before someone creates that type of experience. That isn't as interesting to me as the part of the future that I can't describe to you because we haven't had the idea yet. It's the type of story that we've never seen and the type of experience that none of us have had. That's what's more interesting to me, because ultimately, while we might be held back by technology right now, it's no secret that technology is advancing pretty quickly. It's evolving at an escalating rate to the point where within most of our lifetimes, it'll be moving faster than we can keep up with it. And that means that soon, the limit to the kinds of stories we can tell is not going to be based on technology. The limit is going to be us. The limit's going to be the limit of our imagination. It's going to be the limit of our capacity for design. It's not going to be that we don't have a computer that can do it. It's going to be we don't know how to build the blueprints. And that is the most exciting and infuriating part of my job. There is absolutely no guidance for how we're going to make these kinds of stories. Writers in virtually every other medium have this incredible body of work that they get to refer back to when they have a problem. They have Shakespeare and Dickinson and Hitchcock and Hemingway. They have the greats. They have people who figured it out before, so we don't have to. And in my field, we don't have that. There is not a large body of the kinds of stories that I tell. And there's a good chance that any given day when I walk into work, I'm going to encounter a problem that no one has ever had before. We're at an interesting point in our evolution in storytelling, in the sense that for the first time in a very long time, we don't need students. We need inventors. We don't have our Shakespeare yet, but that means it could be you. It could be me. It could be anyone in the audience. It could be anyone watching this online. It could even, I think, be Ted. And I think if Ted was here, he would tell me that the best way for me to wrap up my talk would be to share an idea worth spreading. So here's mine. We're at the precipice of an evolution in storytelling, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where we're going to go. Come join us. Be our Shakespeare, and let's invent the future of stories together. Thank you.